Hello, beautiful people. We're going to take a look at this book called The Chaldean Account of Genesis, written by George Smith. And the reason that I wanted to start reading this a little bit is because George Smith was one of the first people to translate Cuneiform, which is the language of the ancient Sumerian gods that genetically modified the human slave species. Now, this guy is from the 1800s. All his books were written in the 1800s. And from what I know, this was like the OG of cracking the code in terms of figuring out how to translate cuneiform. So let's go through some of this here. This book is really old. This one right here, I think it's from the late 1800s. It says the Assyrian explorations and discoveries, and Assyrian, Babylonian, the Anunnaki. This is all that era that we're going to be diving into here. So, the Chaldean account of Genesis, containing the description of the creation, the fall of man, the deluge, the Tower of Babel, the times of the patriarchs, and Nimrod, Babylonian fables and legends of the gods from the Cuneiform inscriptions by George Smith, with illustrations. Yeah, 1871 or 76. Sorry, 1876 was when this was published. To Sir Henry Creswick Rawlinson, my teacher and predecessor in my present line of research. Okay, let's see here. Introduction. Some explanation is necessary in introducing my present work. Little time has elapsed since I discovered the most important of these inscriptions in the intervening period I have had, amidst other work, to collect the various fragments of the legends, copy, compare, and translate, altering my matter from time to time as new fragments turned up. Even now I have gone to press with one of the fragments of the last tablet of the Isdubar series omitted. The present condition of the legends and the recent discovery alike forbid me to call this anything more than a provisional work. But there was so general a desire to see the translations that I have published them, hoping my readers will take them with the same reserve with which I have given them. I have avoided some of the most important comparisons and conclusions with respect to Genesis, as my desire was first to obtain the recognition of the evidence without prejudice. The chronological notes in the book are one of its weak points, but I may safely say that I have placed them in various dates as low as I fairly could, considering the evidence, and I have aimed to do this rather than to establish any system of chronology. I believe that time will show the Babylonian traditions of Genesis to be invaluable, for the light they will throw on the Pentateuch. Sorry, I don't recognize that word. Pentateuch. But at present, there are so many blanks in the evidence that positive conclusions on several points are impossible. I may add, in conclusion, that my present work is intended as a popular account, and I have introduced only so much explanation as seems necessary for the proper understanding of the subject. I have added translations of some parts of the legends which I avoided in my last work, desiring here to satisfy the wish to see them as perfect as possible. There still remain, however, some passage which I have omitted, but these are of small extent and obscure. Contents. Chapter 1. The discovery of the Genesis legends. Cosmogony of Berosus, discovery of cuneiform inscriptions, historical text, Babylonian origin of Assyrian literature, mythological tablets, discovery of deluge text, Izdubar, his exploits, mutilated condition of tablets, lecture on deluge tablets, Daily Telegraph, offer, expedition to Assyria, fragments of creation tablets, solar myth, second journey to Assyria, Tower of Babel, clay records, account of creation. Okay, it's going over all the different stuff that I assume that this book is going to go over. We go down here, Babylonian and Assyrian, the literature, the Cuneiform library, fragmentary condition. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. What else we got? Babylonian chronology, Akkad, Sumar, Uruk, king of Ur, Hammurabi, Babylonian astrology, the war of the gods. Okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff we're going over in this book here. So this looks like a pretty interesting book that I think a lot of the people that like the kind of content that I talk about on my YouTube and my TikTok would like to also dive into this a little bit. Okay, it's going over all the different contexts of all the different chapters. So let's scroll down a little bit and pass this up and see if we can just start reading into the first chapter. Blank page, list of illustrations. Okay, let's skip past the list of illustrations. We can come back to them later. I like it when these books have illustrations. It really just helps to, or at least me, because I'm a visual learner. It really just helps me grasp the concept of what they're teaching here. Okay, I believe this is the actual start of the book, Chapter 1, the discovery of the Genesis legends. The fragments of the Chaldean history, or Chaldean historian Berosus, preserved in the works of various later writers, have shown that the Babylonians were acquainted with traditions referring to the creation, the period before the flood, the deluge, and other matters forming parts of Genesis. Berosus, however, who recorded those events, lived in the time of Alexander the Great and his successors, somewhere about BC 330 to 260, and as this was 300 years after the Jews were carried captive to Babylon, his work did not prove that these traditions were in Babylonia before the Jewish captivity and could not afford testimony in favor of the great antiquity of the legends. On the discovery and decipherment of the cuneiform inscriptions, Oriental scholars hoped that copies of the Babylonian histories and traditions would one day be discovered, and we should thus gain earlier and more satisfactory evidence as to these primitive histories. In the mound of Koyunjik, opposite the town of Mosul, Mr. Layard discovered part of the Royal Assyrian Library, and further collections, also forming parts of his library, have been subsequently found by Mr. H. Rassam, Mr. Loftus, and myself. Sir Henry Rawlinson, who made the preliminary examination of Mr. Layard's treasures, and who was the first to recognize their value, estimated the number of these fragments of inscriptions at over 20,000. The attention of decipherers was in the first instance drawn to the later historical inscriptions, particularly to those of the Assyrian kings contemporary with the Hebrew monarchy, and in this section of inscriptions was a very large number of texts of great importance rewarded the toil of Assyrian scholars. Inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, Sargon, Sennacherib, I'm doing my best with these names, Esarhaddon, Nebuchadnezzar, Naboni, or Nabonidus, I think is how you say that, and numerous other ancient sovereigns bearing directly on the Bible and giving new light upon parts of ancient history before obscure for a long time occupied almost extensively or exclusively the attention of students and overshadowed any work in other divisions of Assyrian literature. Although it was known that Assyria borrowed its civilization and written characters from Babylonia, yet as the Assyrian nation was mostly hostile to the southern and older kingdom, it could not be guessed beforehand that the peculiar national traditions of Babylonia would be transported to Assyria. Under these circumstances, for some years after the cuneiform inscriptions were first deciphered, nothing was looking for or discovered bearing upon the events of Genesis. But as new texts were brought into notice, it became evident that the Assyrians copied their literature largely from Babylonian sources, and it appeared likely that search among the fragments of Assyrian inscriptions would yield traces, at least, of some of these ancient Babylonian legends. Attention was early drawn to these points by Sir Henry Rawlinson, who pointed out several coincidences between the geography of Babylonia and the account of Eden in Genesis, and suggested the great probability that the account of Genesis had a Babylonian origin. When at work preparing for the fourth volume of cuneiform inscriptions, I noticed references to the creation in a tablet numbered K63 in a museum collection, and allusions in other tablets to similar legends. I therefore set about searching through the collection, which I had previously selected under the head of quote-unquote mythological tablets, to find, if possible, some of these legends. The mythological collection was one of 6 divisions into which I parted the museum collection of cuneiform inscriptions for convenience of working. By placing all the tablets and fragments of the same class together, I had been able to complete several texts to easily find any subject required and at any time to get a general idea of the contents of the collection. The mythological division contained all tablets relating to the mythology and all the legends in which the gods took a leading part, together with prayers and similar subjects. Sorry, let me close out of Facebook so there's no more notifications. Commencing a steady search among these fragments, I soon found half of a curious tablet which had evidently contained originally 6 columns of texts. 2 of these, and in parentheses it says the third and the fourth, were still nearly perfect. 2 others, the second and the fifth, were imperfect, about half remaining, while the remaining column, the first and sixth, were entirely lost. On looking down on the third column, my eye caught the statement that the ship rested on the mountains of Nizir, followed by the account of the sending forth of the dove, and its finding no resting place and returning. I saw at once that I had here discovered a portion of at least of the Chaldean account of the deluge. I then proceeded to read through the document and found it was in the form of a speech from the hero of the deluge to a person whose name appeared to be Izdubar. So I guess that's what the name they attributed to what the Americans know as Noah from the flood story, I think. I recollected a legend belonging to the same hero, Izdubar, K.231, which no comparison proved to belong to the same series, and then I commenced a search for any missing portions of the tablets. This search was a long and heavy work, for there were thousands of fragments to go over, while on the one side I had gained as yet only 2 fragments of the Izdubar legends to judge from. On the other hand, The unsorted fragments were so small and contained so little of the subject that it was extremely difficult to ascertain their meaning. My search, however, proved successful. I found a fragment of another copy of the deluge containing again the sending forth of the birds, and gradually collected several other portions of this tablet, fitting them in one after another until I had completed. The greater part of the second column portion of the third copy next turned up, which, when joined together, completed a considerable part of the first 6 columns. I now had the account of the deluge in the state in which I published it as the Meeting of Society of Biblical Archaeology. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit. December 3rd, 1872 was when he had this meeting with the Society of Biblical Archaeology. And imagine how like a pain in the butt it must have been to try to piece together all these tablets and things that are written in a language you didn't even understand, and how to translate it. Like it must have taken him just countless hours to figure this out. I had discovered that the Izdubar series contained at least 12 tablets, and I afterwards found this to be their exact number. Of this series, the tablet describing the deluge was the 11th, and K231. The 6th, numerous other fragments turned up at the same time, but these, while they increased my knowledge of the legends, and could not be arranged in order from want of indication of the particular tablets to which they belonged. Some other fragmentary legends, including the War of the Gods and 3 fables, I also found at the same time, but these were in such mutilated condition that I could not make a connected translation of them. In my lecture on the deluge tablets, I gave a sketch of the Izdubar legends and expressed my belief that the Chaldean inscriptions contained various other similarities or other similar stories bearing upon the book of Genesis, which would prove of the highest interest. Just at this time happened the intervention of the properties or the proprietors of the Daily Telegraph newspaper, Mr. E. Arnold, who is on the direction of the papers, had already sent to me expressing his interest in these discoveries, and immediately after my lecture he came armed with the proposition from the proprietors of the Daily Telegraph to reopen at their cost the excavation in Assyria and gain some new information on the subject of the legends. The proposition was submitted to the trustees of the British Museum, and they directed me to go to Assyria and make a short excavation, a leave of absence for 6 months being granted to me for this purpose. I have related in my work, Assyrian Discoveries, the history of this expedition, which brought me the next fragments of these legends. Soon after, I commenced excavating at Koyunjik on the site of the palace of Assurbanipal. I found a new fragment of the Chaldean account of the deluge belonging to the first column of the tablet, relating the command to build and fill the ark, and nearly filling up the most considerable blank in the story. Some other fragments which I found afterwards still further completed this tablet, which was already the most perfect one in the Izdubar series. The trench in which I found the fragment in question must have passed very near the place where the Assyrians kept a series of inscriptions belonging to the early history of the world. Soon after I discovered the fragments of the deluge tablet, I came upon the fragment of the 6th tablet of the same series in the trench, and not far from the place of the deluge fragment. This fragment described the destruction of the bull of Ishtar by Izdubar and Hiebani, or Habani, an incident often depicted in the early Babylonian gems. My next discovery here was a fragment evidently belonging to the creation of the world. This was the upper corner of the tablet and gave a fragmentary account of the creation of animals. Further on this trench, I discovered two other portions of this legend, one giving the creation and fall of man, and the other having part of the war between the gods and evil spirits. At that time, I did not recognize the importance of the fragments, excepting the one with the account of the creation of the animals. And, as I had immediately afterwards to return to England, I made no further discoveries in this direction. Wow, this guy was like a real-life Indiana Jones living in the 1800s, making deals with museums, sending them out on excavations. All right, let's continue. On my return from the East, I published some of the discoveries I have made, and I now found on joining the fragments of the Deluge or Izdubar series that they formed exactly 12 tablets. The fact that these legends covered 12 tablets led to the impression that they were a form of the solar myth, that is, that they symbolized the passage of the sun through the heavens, each tablet representing a separate sign of the zodiac. This opinion, first started by Sir Henry Rawlinson, was at once accepted by M. Lenormant Rev, A.H. Sayce, I think that's how you pronounce the name, and other scholars, but I think myself it rests on too insecure a basis to be true. In a subsequent chapter, I will give as nearly as I can the contents of the Izdubar legends, which I think do not warrant this view. Some months further passed, during which I was engaged in my second journey to Assyria and in realizing the results of the expedition. I again brought from Assyria several fragments of the Genesis legends which helped to complete these curious stories. And in January of 1875, I commenced once more a regular search for these fragments. Very soon afterwards, I succeeded in discovering a notice of the building of the Tower of Babel, which at once attracted attention, and a notice of it, which appeared in the Athenaeum, number 2468, was copied into several of the papers. I was, however, that time hardly prepared to publish these legends, as I had not ascertained how far they could have completed from our present collections. Subsequent search did not show that any further fragments of the Babel tablet were in the British Museum, but I soon added several fresh portions to the fragmentary history of the creation and fall. The greatest difficulty with which I had to contend in all these researches was the extremely mutilated and deficient condition in which the tablets were found. There can be no doubt that if the inscriptions were perfect, they would present very little difficulty to the translator. The reason why these legends are in so many fragments and the different parts so scattered may be explained from the nature of the material of which the tablets are composed and the changes undergone by them since they were written. These tablets were composed of fine clay and were inscribed with cuneiform characters while in a soft state. They were baked in a furnace until hard, and afterwards transferred to the library. The texts appear to have been broken up when Nineveh was destroyed, and many of them were cracked and scorched by the heat at the burning of the place. Subsequently, the ruins were turned over in search of treasure, and the tablets still further broken. And then, to complete their ruin, the rain, every spring, soaking through the ground, saturates them with water containing chemicals, and these chemicals form crystals in every available crack. The growth of the crystals further split the tablets, some of them being literally slivered or shivered. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit. Very interesting stuff. So here's a depiction of what these tablets looked like, and he had to piece these things together and figure all this out. Some of the mutilated condition of the Assyrian tablets and the work of restoring a single text will be gained from the engraving below, which exhibits the present appearance of one of the deluge tablets. In this tablet, there are 16 fragments. It says right here, reverse of inscribed terracotta tablet containing the account of the deluge, showing the various fragments of which it composed. The clay records of the Assyrians are by the means so broken up that they are in some cases divided into over 100 fragments, and it is only by collecting and joining together the various fragments that these ancient texts can be restored. Many of the old fragmentary tablets, which have been 20 years in the British Museum, have been added to considerably by fragments which I found during my 2 journeys, and yet there remain at least 20,000 fragments buried in the ruins without the recovery of which it is impossible to complete these valuable Assyrian inscriptions. I've heard rumors that there's a lot of sites in ancient Iraq, like the city of Eridu, where they're not even excavated. The governments don't want to excavate these sites because they don't want people knowing what's in them. And a lot of people go there and they just start looting these things. Because these cuneiform tablets, like if you can get your hands on some of this stuff, it's worth a lot of money, and they sell them on the black markets. They collect them. It's this is like Indiana Jones type stuff. Being now urged as many friends who were interested in the subject, I sent the following account to the editor of the Daily Telegraph, which was printed in that paper on the 4th of March, 1875, having recently made a series of important discoveries relating to the book of Genesis, among some remarkable text from which form part of the collection presented to the British Museum by the proprietors of the Daily Telegraph. I venture once more to bring Assyrian subjects before your readers. In my lecture on the Chaldean account of the deluge, which I delivered on December 3rd, 1872, I stated my conviction that all the earlier narratives of Genesis would receive new light from these inscriptions so long buried in the Chaldean and Assyrian mounds. But I little thought at the time that I was so near to finding most of them. My lecture, as your readers know, was soon followed by the proposal of your proprietors and the organization of the Daily Telegraph expedition to Assyria. When excavating the Koyunjik during that expedition, I discovered the missing portion of the first column of the deluge tablet, an account of which I sent home, and in the same trench I subsequently found the fragment which I afterwards recognized as part of the Chaldean story of the creation, which relic I have noticed already in your columns. I excavated later on, while still working under your auspicious another portion belonging to the story, far more precious, in fact, I think, to the general public, the most interesting and remarkable cuneiform tablet yet discovered. This turns out to contain the story of a man's original innocence of the temptation and the fall, the Garden of Eden. I was, when I found it, on the eve of departing and had not time to properly examine my great prize. I only copied the 2 or 3 first lines, which, as I had then no idea of the general subject of the tablet, did not appear very valuable, and I forthwith peeked it into the box for transport to England, where it arrived safely and was presented by the proprietors of the Daily Telegraph, with the rest of their collection to the British Museum. On my return to England, I made some other discoveries among my store, and in the pursuit of these, this fragment was overlooked. I subsequently went a second time to Assyria and returned to England in June of 1874, but I had no leisure to look again at those particular legends until the end of January this year. Then stating with the fragment of the creation in the Daily Telegraph collection, which I had first noticed, I began to collect other portions of the series, and among these I soon found the overlooked fragment which I had excavated at Koyunjik, the first lines of which I took down in the notebook of my first expedition. I subsequently found several smaller pieces in the old museum collection, and all join or form parts of a continuous series of legends giving the history of the world from the creation down to some period after the fall of man. Linked with these, I found also other series of legends on primitive history, including the story of the building of the Tower of Babel and of the confusion of the tongues. The first series, which I may call the story of the creation and fall, when complete, must have consisted of 9 or 10 tablets at least, and the history upon it is much longer and fuller than the corresponding account in the book of Genesis. With respect to these Genesis narratives, a furious strife has existed for many years. Every word has been scanned by eager scholars, and every possible meaning which the various passages could bear has been suggested. While the age and authenticity of the narratives have been discussed on all sides, in particular, it may be said that the account of the fall of man, the heritage of all Christian countries, has been the center of this controversy, for it is one of the pivots on which the Christian religion turns. The worldwide importance of these subjects will therefore give the newly discovered inscriptions, and especially the one relating to the fall, an unparalleled value, and I am glad, indeed, that such a treasure should have resulted from the expedition. Whatever the primitive account may have been from which the earlier part of the book of Genesis was copied, it is evident that the brief narration given in the Pentateuch, or there's that weird word again, omits a number of incidents and explanations, for instance, as to the origin of evil, the fall of the angels, the wickedness, the serpent, etc. Such points as these are included in the cuneiform narrative, but, of course, I can say little about them until I prepare full translations of the legends. The narrative on the Assyrian tablets commences with a description of the period before the world was created, when there existed a chaos or confusion, the desolate and empty state of the universe, and the generation by chaos of monsters are vividly given. The chaos is presided over by a female power named Tisalat, and Tiamat, corresponding to the Thalith of Berosus. But as it proceeds, the Assyrian account agrees rather with the Bible than with the short account of Berosus. We are told that the inscriptions of the fall of the celestial being who appeared to correspond to Satan In his ambition, he raises his hand against the sanctuary of the God of heaven, and the description of him is really magnificent. He is represented riding in a chariot through celestial space, surrounded by the storms, with the lightning playing before him and wielding a thunderbolt as a weapon. Kind of sounds like Zeus from Greek mythology. The rebellion leads to a war in heaven and the conquest of the powers of evil, the gods, in due course creating the universe in stages, as in the Mosaic narrative, surveying each step of the work and pronouncing it good. The divine work culminates in the creation of man, who is made upright and free from evil, and endowed by the gods with the noble faculty of speech. The deity then delivers a long address to the newly created being, instructing him in all his duties and privileges, and pointing out the glory of his state. But the condition of blessing does not last long before man, yielding to temptation, falls, and the deity then pronounces upon him a terrible curse, invoking on his head all of the evils which have since afflicted humanity. The last details are as I have before stated upon the fragment which I excavated during my first journey to Assyria, and the discovery of the single relic, in my opinion, increases many times over the value of the Daily Telegraph collection. I have at present recovered no more of the story, and I am not yet in a position to give the full translation and details, but I hope during the spring to find some time to search over the collection of smaller fragments of tablets and to light upon any smaller parts of the legends that may have escaped me. There will arise, besides, a number of important questions as to the date and origin of the legends, their comparison with the biblical narrative, and as to how far they may supplement the Mosaic account. This will serve to exhibit the appearance these legends presented to me soon after I discovered them. On comparing this account with the translations and notes I have given this book, it will be evident that my first notice was inaccurate in several points, both as to the order of the translation of the legends, but I had not expected it to be otherwise, for there had not been time to collect and translate the fragments, and until that was done, no satisfactory account of them could be given. The inaccuracies in the account being due to the broken state of the tablets and my recent knowledge of them. It is a notable fact that the discovery of those legends was one of the fruits of the expedition organized by the proprietors of the Daily Telegraph, and those legends of the deluge fragments from the most valuable results of that expedition. After I had published this notice in the Daily Telegraph, I set to work to look over the fragments in the collection in search of other minor fragments, and found several, but these added little to my knowledge, only enabling me to correct my notice. A little later, I discovered a new fragment of the 10th tablet of the Deluge series, and last of all, a further portion of the 6th tablet of those legends. This closed my discoveries so far as the fragments of the tablets were concerned, and I had then to copy and translate the tablets as far as their mutilated condition would allow. The Genesis legends, which I had collected from the various Assyrian fragments, included numerous other stories besides those which parallel the account of the book of Genesis. All these stories are similar in character and appear to belong to the same early literary age. So far as I have made out, they are as follows. a long account of the origin of the world, the creation of the animals and man, the fall of man from a sinless state, and a conflict between the gods and the powers of evil. A second account of the creation having closer correspondence with the account of Berosus, a bilingual legend of the history of the seven evil spirits, apparently part of the third version of the creation, story of the descendants of the goddess Ishtar, or Venus, into Hades and her return, legend of the sin of the god Zu, who insults Elu, the father of the gods, collection of the 5 tablets giving the exploits of Lubara, the god of the pestilence, legend of the god of Sartuda, who turned into a bird, story of the wise man who put forth a riddle to the gods, legend of the god-man, Atarpi, and the wickedness of the world, legend of the Tower of Babel and dispersion, story of the eagle and Etana, story of the ox and the horse, story of the fox, legend of the Sinuri, Izdubar legend, 12 tablets, with the story of Izdubar and the account of the flood, various fragments of other legends. These show that there was considerable collection of such primitive stories, almost unrepresented in our past collection. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. We may continue chapter 2 in another upload, and chapter 2 is entitled Babylonian and Assyrian Literature.